It's us. We're live. Hello. How are you, everybody? This is the Telling Your Story: How to Bust into Webcomics panel with your hosts Ari Noble, the handsome Dalmatian on the left, and uh, Caitlin Vilbrandt, the scribbling cat on the right. How is everybody doing today? Are you guys having a good day? Uh, yeah. This is very exciting. We are the creators of Tamberlane, the webcomic. Um, and it's my brainchild, and I brought Ari in to be my co-writer. We have done lots of webcomic things. He has another webcomic that he writes called Mothorial, which is also very excellent. Tamberlane currently has over 40,000 followers, subscribers, or whatever on Webtoon. So I have decided that means that we are qualified to tell you how to talk about webcomics. Hold on. Hold on, there's no sound coming from Meta. Uh-oh. What the hecky? Let me see what happened. Excuse me while I check things. Da-da. Nope, nope, wrong buttons. There we go. I got this. We're good. We're fine. Everything's great. Why isn't Discord going in? Oh, probably because no, wait. I got this. We're good. That's why. I figured it out. Okay, now you should be able to hear him.
And that's how you make webcomics. Thank you all so much. Oh, shoot, you didn't hear it? I'm so sorry, guys. Yes, hello. I'll just say it again. Thank you so much for having me. Here we go. Anyway, what I was saying was, hello, my name is Ari Noble. I'm a writer, and I started working about 4 or 5 years ago on a webcomic with my good friend Izzy Squeaksy, and we launched the comic publicly about a year or so ago. And now we are, maybe actually longer than that. And yeah, now we're sharing with the world our story. And Caitlin brought me on as co-writer for Tamberlane as well. And it's been amazing. So we decided that we wanted to kind of talk about what the process has been like, what we learned, how to do it, what not to do, and why webcomics are such a cool medium. So let's get started.
Yeah, let's do it. Do, 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 do. So, webcomics are not a new medium by any means. They are definitely, they've been around for quite some time. I was reading webcomics in the early 90s, or not early, sorry, mid to late 90s. Um, it's a fantastic medium. It's unfettered, as one might say.
Yeah, and I remember that when I don't know how many people here have had this experience, but when I first read and heard of webcomics in the early 2000s, for me, it was Penny Arcade and questionable content and all these comics. I'm like, they had some serialization going on, but generally speaking, they were kind of just week to week stories, which are really, really cool. But it led me to the impression that if I had a longer form story, that wasn't what a webcomic was for, I guess. And then I read Order of the Stick, which I believe again in 2005, and that was the first time I read a comic that was like, no, this is just a graphic novel, basically. This is an ongoing story. We're just releasing it week to week directly to you. You can tell anything you want. This is your space, and that was a really exciting thought to me of wait, I could just tell my story without having to go through the executive, sort of complicated system. I wanted to mention kind of that, I think a lot of people probably have thought about this. I'm assuming a lot of you who are coming in here, it might not be necessarily just specifically webcomics that excited you. It might have also been the concept of telling a story at all, usually a visual story. And maybe with for example, the way things have been going with HBO Max recently, I'm sure a lot of animators and storytellers are I have a story, but I don't really know where I'm going to put it or how I'm going to share it. And like, does the world respect my medium? And the answer is yes. The fact that the people on these platforms don't get that is their weakness. And webcomics are a perfect example of like how we can take the storytelling back, right? This is our stories we're telling. It isn't the executive stories, it's our stories. And
Exactly.
webcomics, you you tell them. Do you want to talk about like kind of like where Webtoon plays into that? 'Cause I think that's another huge part of why everyone's kind of been interested recently in webcomics in the last few
Yeah, there's
years.
definitely been like a resurgence in webcomic popularity with Webtoons kind of coming on the field. Specifically because Webtoons is funded by essentially the Korean equivalent of Google or Amazon. And therefore, because manhwa are so much more, like comics in general, are so much more culturally important in Korea, they are given this very like big platform, and then over time, Line Webtoon, when it was purchased by Naver, they kind of swooped in and started really like boosting the platform. And because there's a lot of ways to make money through Webtoon, it kind of really took off, especially in America, and as well. And so with that, there are a lot of people I run into who are like, I have no idea what a webcomic is. I know what a webtoon is, but I don't know what a webcomic is.
Oh
And I'm
yeah,
like, that's weird to me because I'm a dinosaur, but I get it, right?
oh yeah.
So
Also, to
like,
Jack,
yeah. So as much as Webtoons has a lot of weaknesses,
mhm,
they also have done a lot of good
great stuff.
things for the industry in general.
And so, first off, I'll say to Jack, no one has my fast talking superpower. That is mine, and I will take over the world. I guess this is the main kind of point that we want to kind of start talking about, which is what Tara Blinks actually just said, which is a perfect segue, which is I've been slacking on making webcomics for years, just had bad depression that gave me no concept of follow through. And this is not, you're not alone. The amount of people who want to make a webcomic or want to make a comic or a story who cannot follow through on that. I mean, that was me. I'm 28 and I started making Mothorial at 24. I've been wanting to make a webcomic since I was 13. It isn't easy.
No,
And
it's not.
do you want to kind of talk about some of the things that can really help a lot that people just don't consider? I think obviously we want to talk about first off the value of a webcomic. Like for those who want to tell a story, but don't know why a webcomic would be better than maybe some other methods. There's a couple things I think are really important in that. One of the most obvious ones is Patreon. Patreon
Yeah.
has made a world of difference in terms of back in the day when you ran a webcomic, you had to maybe have a merch store and hope people bought some stuff, go to cons and hope people bought some stuff, run ads and hope people bought the ads. Now, even if like Mothorial doesn't have the largest web reader base yet, we're still growing that because it takes time, but we are making some money on the comic enough to support the artist in drawing it.
Yeah.
And that's huge. Like we couldn't have done that 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, like
And
I have a small team of people that I pay a little bit to help me out with Tamberlane, and there is absolutely no way that that would have happened without Patreon.
I definitely want to I'm going to pick an analogy here with YouTube, which is I have seen a lot of YouTube creators who are like, I want to, make a channel. I have a passionate thing I'm excited about. But then they watch people like, Jacksepticeye, Markiplier, these huge YouTubers with millions of subscribers, and they say, I could never be that. I might as well not try. You don't have to be bringing in millions of viewers in order to make money and a long-standing job out of making a webcomic. You just need a series of passionate readers, and they are there. Even if you don't necessarily know at first that they're going to be there, people love stories and they're hungry for these types of stories.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like where we kind of want to talk about, okay, so webcomics are cool. You can obviously represent a lot more. Like Caitlin was able to have a trans character in this comic in a way that, let's be honest, Disney, for example, might not be accepting of because Disney's executive team are from the 1700s. And are very close-minded about a lot of queer content. That's a great example of like, or as an Iranian myself, like being able to, as a brown person growing up in the world, seeing all these creators being just white people, I was like, oh wait, I can tell my story and not worry that someone's going to not let me tell my story because of something about myself. Webcomics are this opportunity for like diverse voices to tell diverse stories, and that's so cool.
It is
And
excellent.
there's an audience looking for it, and they're not going to find that necessarily if they go on Disney Plus, right? They're not going to find nearly as much diverse content as actually exists out there. So if you feel like your story needs to be told, but you're worried that those executive type people aren't going to want it, well, maybe they don't deserve it, right? Maybe that's not the platform for it. But the problem that I think you run into when you get to that question, you're like, okay, I'm going to do webcomic. This is what I'm going to do. Then you run into the big one, which I think Caitlin and I both know, which is how on earth do you do something this big and this complicated and this artistically intense?
Yeah.
Like, what if you're a writer and you, like me, I cannot draw. I'm terrible at drawing. Or what if you're an artist who can maybe write a little bit, but doesn't really like writing? It's not what you're excited about. You like story development, but you don't want to sit there and write a script. Well, that's kind of the main topic we want to talk about today, is what does it actually mean to like make a webcomic? How do you maybe a little bit avoid, how do you avoid burnout? How do you do a comic if you don't have all of the skills required, which people seem to think that a webcomic has to be a one-person team doing everything by themselves? Uh, how do you host it? Because obviously Webtoon exists, but not everyone wants to use Webtoon, or they might have other ideas. We have some suggestions for that. Um, what can I write? Like, how do I come up with ideas? We kind of want to talk about all these things today, because I think those are the questions you don't get answers to very commonly. When you look up how to make a webcomic, people will maybe say where to host it vaguely. They'll say, oh, go on Webtoon. And they won't tell you, okay, you want to do a webcomic, but you can't draw? Well, maybe there's an option for you. They don't talk about that, and there is. So I'll throw it over to Caitlin, I guess, to start off talking about kind of her starting on Tamberlane. Like, that you started comics before I did, so
That's true.
you kind of came into this from, you built a webcomic from basically nothing. That was your decision to do that. You didn't have someone assisting you. What was that experience like?
So like, okay, as a little bit of backstory, I had done 2 webcomic attempts prior. One of them was during high school with absolutely no plan, no, like the whole idea was I was just going to write it page to page and find out what happened. And what happened was that I eventually burned out and stopped. Then I did another one that went for a while where my friend wrote it and I drew it. But that wound up fizzling out as well due to issues on my end. And then I got into the My Little Pony fandom because I was right about the time that was getting big, and my husband and my friend and I made a very popular card game for it. And then once we decided to end that, I was like, cool, okay, what's my next project? And I'd been working on and workshopping this idea for a long time for this other comic, and it just wasn't gelling. And by the time like a year had rolled around, I was like getting seriously like antsy, like I don't have a project to work on. And so eventually one day I said, all right, the next comic idea I have, I'm going to do that one. And it doesn't matter what it is. I don't care whether I have ideas or not. I'm going to just go. And so about a month later or so, I had the idea for Tamberlane. All it started from was like, oh, I drew a funky little character. It's cute. I kind of want to draw it more. What if I made this one of the characters? Okay, there's this other funky character I've been drawing. What if I made that another character? And then it kind of went from there, and I kind of just threw together some ideas and relationships. I think I spent about a month figuring out the general idea of the story, and then I was like, all right, cool, next thing I'm going to do is a coloring test. So I did a page for practice, and then oops, that was the first page I did, and then I just kept going. But the biggest one, the biggest thing about Tamberlane that has made it so good for like continuing to go is that it's still a practice comic to me. It is not my magnum opus. It is not And although it means a lot to me, and there's a lot of things I want to say with it, and I love doing it, and it's a very fulfilling project and everything, it isn't the big cheese deal that it could have been if I had been still trying to focus on that other comic, which is still in the works 8 years later.
Yeah, this
But
is one of the biggest points you just made. I wanted to say lean heavy on. There's this idea of creating your magnum opus, which I think is the most toxic idea a person could have, because no one started. Maybe one person. I don't know. I'm not going to promise no one has, but most artists don't start their magnum opus being like, and now time to create my greatest work. Here we go. They just create something and then it happens to be their, because magnum opus means greatest work. It is like maybe I thought the literal interpretation, but in colloquially it means this is the greatest and most important thing this artist created.
yeah.
You cannot possibly know that till they're done, till they've made all the art they're ever gonna make, and they're done, and they've retired, and they're done. Then you can go, which was their magnum opus. Don't create what you're going to create because it's going to be the greatest thing ever. Just make it to make it. That's how everything starts, right? You can't worry about every page being perfect. The art might not be perfect. Order of the stick.
The art
for
will
those
not
who
be
think
perfect. Nothing will be perfect about it. You need to really, really make peace with the fact that it's not going to live up to what's in your head. And the most important thing is just to go. Keep going. Just do it. Keep figuring things out. You can always edit things in post. It's fine. Just keep going.
and I really want to draw attention to, there's a comic, the one I mentioned before, Order of the Stick. That was the first one that I read that kind of expanded my mind into what a webcomic could be. When I read it, I want people who, anyone in this group who's listening in, who says I can draw, but it's not good enough. Go look at Order of the Stick. It is an epic fantasy, huge story, and it's a bunch of stick figures. There's, I mean,
yes.
You know, the person has they're good at drawing. They know what they're doing. They've been doing this for now, 20 years. But when they started, it was a background, MS Paint background with some stick figures with faces, and they just did that. And yet the story was so good. My friends and I would buy the books and read them like graphic novels. We'd be wait every week for the update. You don't have to be drawing like Leonardo da Vinci to be making a webcomic, and you certainly don't need to be at your best to start. Because that doesn't even make any sense. You can't be your best when you start anything.
And honestly, webcomics or comics in general are really one of the best boot camps out there for learning to draw, because you have to draw so many things for it. And as you continue to be oh god, okay, I've got to draw a car today, and I keep having to draw this car for this whole scene, and that sucks. And then you get through that scene, and you're oh, thank God, okay. And then the next time you have to draw a car, you're oh, okay, yeah, I remember a little bit about how to do this, and it just keeps getting better the more you do it. And also, I also would like to shout out to Gunny's comment, which is, your magnum opus means greatest work, as in it is built upon your prior works, so get works out there.
That is the best way. So that kind of ties into, I think, the number one thing that's going to happen when you want to start a comic, which is one of four phrases. I'm not good enough at writing. I'm not good enough at drawing. I can't draw, or I can't write. If you just don't have the time, that's an understandable thing. Some people just don't have the time, and that's okay. If you literally have zero time to do it, and there's no way to make time, that's okay. And I'm not going to tell you make time magically. I understand that not everyone can. But if you have the time, or you know where to find the time to do something, but you're worried that you're either not good enough or can't do something, there are solutions to that. So I think the first thing that we should talk about is the Caytlin already kind of talked about the I'm not good enough. Caytlin might have started Tamberlane thinking, well, my art could be better. My art could be better than it is. I could write a little more than I have before I start this, but where would that have left you? Right?
Yeah, you just
when would
keep going. You just keep sitting there going, well, it's not good enough yet. And you will not be good enough yet forever, because we are our own worst critics.
Yeah. And I promise you, there will never be a time where you will make a work, like a webcomic, where you don't go back to page 1 and be shocked at how much you've grown. And how is that anything but a wonderful feeling, right? If you go back to page 1 and go, man, I'm so much better, that's good. That's not bad. If you look at page 1 and go, man, it's been 10 years and I have not developed at all as an artist or writer, I'm not saying that's bad, it's consistent, I suppose, but if someone's art stays the same over 10 years, it's of constant drawing, it's probably on purpose. It's probably not an accident. Your art and your writing will get better if you start now. You don't have to be your best. You have to be yourself. That's all that matters, is being yourself. But obviously, that doesn't answer the other question, which is, what if I can't draw? What if I can't write? I cannot draw. I can draw silly things. I cannot draw. Maybe I could pull off a stick figure thing, but I also don't take a lot of joy from drawing either. So my experience was a little different than Caytlin's. I've been wanting to make a webcomic since 2005. I dreamed of it. The first time I tried to make a Nuzlocke comic in 2010. Nuzlocke being a Pokemon fan base. And I drew 2 concept characters and was like, I hate doing this, and I stopped. That was about as far as I got. I hated drawing. I'm not a big artist. That's not my thing. But I could write, and I had ideas. And I was hanging out with my friend Izzy Squeaksy, who is a wonderful artist. You should check them out on Twitter. They're great. And she and I were hanging out, and I said, I really want to do a story with you. And here's the thing. At the time, we didn't say webcomic. We said, I want to make a pitch for an animated story. And Caytlin, Izzy and I were both, talking back and forth. We're both very excited about this. Izzy had ideas, but didn't really have the energy to sit down and write a whole script. But she loved to draw. She loved to do character designs. And I loved to write. And she liked my writing, and my writing excited her and made her want to draw. So she drew a couple concept characters. And she gave me some ideas, like, maybe this one's like a wizard, and maybe this one's like a librarian guy. And I'm like, okay. And then we said, okay, what are their names? And then I built up their backstories. And then the world began to come into shape. And then the story began to come into shape. And then I wrote volume 1 I just wrote that. I just wrote a script. And I had never written in my life a script before. So for emphasis, I had never written a script before other than like a couple like 5-page little things with my friends. Nothing serious. I had never tried to write a story. And I could have said, I'm not good enough. What I did is I wrote it, and then when we were drawing them, I was finding that I was improving as I would go back and like work on it. It just got better. Then Izzy drew it, and I couldn't have drawn it, and Izzy didn't have the energy to write it, and so we became a team. And it turns out there's a lot of artists out there who want to tell a story but don't want to write it, and there's a lot of writers out there who want to write a story but don't know how to draw it. You don't have to be a one-man band to do webcomics. It is this idea of the auteur that I think is not good. Comics have never worked that way, where it always was one person. Sometimes it can be, but look at like Marvel and DC. There's always an inker, an artist, a writer, right? I think it's fine as you.
Yeah.
So let me hand it over to Caytlin in terms of like, you started solo. When did you decide to bring other people in, and when did you decide to bring me in, and what was like your experience starting as someone who couldn't afford to pay people to do things? Like Izzy and I don't pay each other. We work on it. We're co-writers on it. We work on it together, and proceeds from Patreon, we work out the finances between the two of us, right? We're like, okay, we're going to work on this together for free because we both want to do this. We're equal parts. I'm not hiring Izzy. Hiring is a different thing than a team of people who want to start something together.
Yeah.
So I would want to ask Caytlin, how did you go from starting alone, volunteer stuff, working with people, and eventually becoming like a paid thing that you pay people and you can actually bring people and say, I'd like you to ink for me? How did that happen for you?
Well, part of it is that I have a disability, an energy and pain disorder, and it means that a lot of times I am down for the count and I can't create, and I really wanted to be able to do more faster. The very first person I hired on was my social media person, because I do not have the energy to keep up with social media, especially not with posting things on a schedule and being all present and like, this is when things are optimally posted and keeping up with the algorithm and blah blah blah. But the so I basically was like, I went to a friend who is more into that kind of stuff than I am, and was like, okay, here's the deal. I need social media. I cannot afford to pay you much, but I do think it's important that I, give you like a fair wage. So I'm going to pay you $15 an hour, but you are limited to 2 hours a week. And anything over that, I will do. And she was like, cool, great. Turns out 2 hours a week is more than enough. So for essentially $60 a month, I can have somebody else doing that stuff for me. And that is really, really cool. And from there, as things went on, I got to get a little bit more money in my Patreon and everything. I was like, okay, it'd be really nice if somebody else did the flats for my comic because I am tired of drawing markings on animals. And so I put out basically an ad that was like, all right, minimum $50 a page. I will pay up higher if the page is more complex. You don't have to worry about backgrounds because I paint all the backgrounds. All you're doing is the characters and the props. And so I wound up taking on 2 flatters, and they pass off pages back and forth. And so it's basically like I don't have to pay anybody a living wage, but I do pay them decent rates for the industry. And it does take a chunk out of my pocket, but it's also not like I'm not paying the salary of 5 people. I'm contracting them for a couple hours of their time a month. And that little bit of help is huge. It really it's amazing to be like really sick one day and just seeing my work get done for me. Like, oh my gosh, it's really cool.
And I think
yeah.
actually I would mention like too that to tie this into like kind of I had a couple questions I've been asked in the chat that I figure could also be tied into this too, which is Superhero says, I have a question. What if you have an idea for a story for a long time, but you find other media that hits the same beats as your story? I would say, because that actually is a big part of that too, like when you're starting out, that sense of like, oh god, like I have this idea, I kind of want to do, someone did that. When I started Mothorial, it was basically just Lord of the Rings with talking animal furry characters, right? And then it found its voice because it's okay if you hit some beats. This is why I always say this is a whole other topic in itself, but writing your plots around characters, making the characters, the story, the plot, every single plot point tied to a character. In that way, every character that anyone writes has some unique thing about them because it comes from a unique voice of that writer. Even if they're maybe not the most original story, their characters are theirs. It's coming from their brain, their thoughts. So if your plot points are coming from characters, it's okay if it's somewhat similar to something that might have already happened because stories have been going for thousands of years, right? Like we can't avoid that entirely.
Yeah.
But tell the story that makes the most sense for you. If you find that someone does the exact same thing, yeah, you can always look for alternatives. But also, don't be worried if you aren't writing something that literally has like it will find its uniqueness. It's kind of inevitable if you don't overthink it. Nothing anyone ever writes is going to be 100% completely unique starting out. It just can't, right? Because our stories are built out of the stories that we have watched and read and listened to and experienced. You can't separate that from what you do. And when Caytlin started out making Tamberlane, she was starting out with, okay, this character is raising this character, and it's going to be kind of a slice of life with a deeper, darker story behind it. But that doesn't mean that, like, and that's, you could say, oh, that's a new story, but like, Caytlin has been from before. She was inspired by some of the Don Bluth movies of the 80s for a lot of the aesthetic and some of the story beats and found her voice through that. You have to start, even if what you're starting isn't perfect, because it won't be. You're going to start as your worst version of your art and the worst version of your writing possible for this comic and become the best as you go. It's impossible to start at your best. It makes no sense. You either have to get worse or not improve. Which, so whatever you do now is great, right? Write your story. If you are worried that you're not different enough than someone, ask a friend to read it. Let them see what they think. If they have suggestions, you now have 2 voices. And suddenly it's maybe you're finding a voice in there that you didn't know existed. Maybe ask, another person to take a crack at editing it. If you don't have friends you can write, just read it out loud to a friend and see if they like it, and if they have a problem with something, ask why and see if you can change it and see if it needs to be changed, right? Like, it's okay if what you're starting out with isn't the most unique thing in the world that no one has ever done before. It will become unique because you are you. and you
Yes.
aren't exactly the same person as someone else.
I am extremely passionate about the fact that the story you tell, you could tell, okay, get a group of people together and you give them a story pitch and you then have them write like a 5-page story. Everybody's story on that pitch is going to be completely and totally unique. They're because you are you and you are the one telling the story, that is what is going to help it stand out. Like you will
Yeah.
not be, unless you are like literally word for word plagiarizing or whatever. You don't need to worry about that kind of thing. Like every story is like that.
Yeah. And so kind of, and this I'll try to tie this into like someone also asked, when you make a comic story, do you ever have any struggles with certain concepts or trying to make the words come to life better? 100%. That's just
Yes.
part of being a writer. It's just there. As a writer, I can give my experience with that, which is the number one thing that helps me, even if I'm by myself, is reading it aloud.
Yes.
When you have characters talking to each other and you're just writing it silently, sometimes you're not really hearing what it sounds like, and a lot of times when someone's reading it out loud, they might realize, oh, this reads weird, and it might just be that you had never read it out loud before and heard like, is this coming off your tongue naturally? And if it isn't, then you can just tweak it until it does sound natural. And like I said, I don't think that my best writing is behind me. I think my best writing is ahead. I'm sure there's times where I would go back and want to edit things. And here's a little secret for you all. If you read a webcomic and you're 100 pages in and you find that there was a line you just don't think worked really well, you can always go back and like update the page. It's not
It's
like it's been
fine.
printed. It's fine. Like you can
And
always go back
hell,
and like
even printed books have different editions for that reason. Like you just go back and edit it. It's fine.
just go back and change the basic. Like Caitlin and I were looking at Tamberlane, and there was one time a panel where the little baby Tamberlane just looked kind of wonky, and it was very funny. And we didn't go, "Oh God, the comic is ruined. This Tamberlane isn't like as on model." We laughed about it, and then Caitlin she tweaked it. Like she just like took 5 seconds to tweak the layer and made it work, and she knew now what was wrong with it and fixed it, and now it's fine. And like no one had ever complained about it before. No one had ever brought it up. People don't really care. Like
Yeah, yeah,
people don't come to webcomics to crap all over your art unless they're a jerk.
yeah,
People come to your comic to hear what you have to say, to read your story, to fall in love with your characters. Order of the Stick is stick figures. People draw fan art and adore these characters. It doesn't matter if everything's perfect. It doesn't matter if the writing and the story is always flawless. Just do what you can do. Like, so obviously there might be oh, and I'll say this to Mythics. Saying from a talented face, which I appreciate very much, thank you. I never thought of myself as talented. I thought of myself as just a person who kind of wanted to do something, and I only found after I did it that I liked what I'd done. Right? Like a lot of people think that artists always who are really good kind of have the sense of like, oh yeah, I know I'm good. We don't. We're doubtful all the time. We're scared. It's
yeah,
hard. It's hard to write something and not think, am I crazy? Is this actually good? Like, of course, everyone thinks that. I mean, unless they're like, I don't know. Steven Spielberg probably doesn't stay up awake at night wondering if he's a decent director. He's probably like, yeah, I'm fine. But 99% of artists, we're just making this because we want to make it, not because we need to be the best to prove something. You're not trying to
yeah.
prove something. You're trying to tell people something, even if that thing is just something that you think is cool. Your story doesn't have to change the world. It just has to be an expression of yourself, and that's wonderful.
It's just what do you need to say, and like what do you want to say? What is it in you that speaks and needs to come out? Like just have fun. Like the whole point of creating is just have fun and speak and let other people hear you. It's just so important for everybody to be able to reach out and touch each other in a like not in a sexy way. I mean that too maybe. I don't know. Just like reach
We are
out and
positive people
touch
here.
hearts.
And yeah, I think this is one thing also because I've said before, I told the story of how I make music as well, and I remember I told the story about one time where I was at a convention and there was one person. The room wasn't that full when I was performing, but there was one person standing in the front row of this, but sitting up against the stage with tears in her eyes, singing along to every word I sang. One person. And here's the thing, I can say all I want, and I will say how much that affected me, and how much, even knowing that like someone out there connected to what I said, even if I didn't write it thinking I'm going to say this because this is wise. I guess this makes sense, right? And then it turned out, yes, what I had to say, it wasn't obvious. And one of the biggest things I'm sure a lot of people can relate to is the idea of like, oh God, I'll write this thing, but everyone, like, I have this point to make or this idea to say in this story, but I feel like everyone already knows that. Turns out they don't. Turns out that like you'll put it out there and there will be tons of people who are like, I never thought of it that way. You're like, oh, my thoughts are original and I'm a human being and I have my own thoughts and I'm not just nothing. And I understand that you can say that and have people go, well, yeah, okay, one person likes it, but that wasn't pay the bills. And that's true. But you don't need, like I mentioned before, millions of people to support you to be able to do this. Yeah. Let's say, for example, that we want to make $1,000 with your comic and people are paying $5 a month. That's 200 people. Let's say that you have $1,000 and they're paying $10. That's $100. 100 people. Like, this isn't thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people donating all their money for you to do this. It, like, even if you're making like $500, $400 because like 30 people are giving you $10, like, that's real money. That's a lot of money, especially for struggling artists starting out. It is something. You don't have to be the top of the game immediately to be able to do this for money and to be able to have value in your work, because every artist deserves money for their work, because art is the most valuable thing, because art is the thing that can create something out of nothing that could never exist. It's making what can never exist. And if you're an artist or a writer and you have a story to tell, even if it's a retread of another theme, even if it's a remake of a classic Greek story, which, you know, Lore Olympus, right? Lore Olympus is just taking gods that already exist and telling a new story with them. And it's wonderful. Like, I think that that's the most important thing. Like, think about them. When you picture your fan base of followers, even if it's 15 people, picture 15 people crowded around your computer reading your thing. Think about what that means, right? So both emotionally and financially, in a very physical, because I understand you can't just say imagine 10 people and they'll go, well, that's not enough to pay the bills. Yeah, but it's a start.
It's a start.
And very quickly you might find that you're making more money and having more support than you thought was possible, because it turns out people want to hear what you have to say. Right? People do care what you have to say. So that's the number one thing. I recently put out a tweet that was like some writing advice that I thought was kind of neat. And I was about to hit the send button and I was like, Ari, everyone knows this. This isn't interesting. This isn't unique. Everyone knows this fact. You're just saying something that every writer knows. This is pointless. And then I said, shut up, part of my brain. And I pressed send anyway. And then like over 200 people liked the tweet. It was like the most I've ever had in a tweet. And a lot of them were responding saying, oh, wow, this is good advice. And I was like, oh, my thoughts are unique. I guarantee that a lot of you in the chat have had that experience of feeling like you have a thought and then think it's not interesting. You're probably wrong. Yeah, I've never met a person who was boring.
Agreed. There's also, like, sometimes somebody might have heard something before, but they need to hear it in just the right way for it to resonate. And it's the same thing with stories. And going back to that point of, like, what if my thing is derivative, or it's already been done before? What if I really want to do a wizard school? I don't want to be seen as a hack. Like, sometimes there's something that you have to say, and other people may have said it, but the way that you articulate it is what gets through to someone else. And that is extremely meaningful.
Mm-hmm. There's a classic example that I find very funny. At this point, this might have been less of a common reference 10 years ago, but now every person, because of memes, is like, oh yeah, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. I've seen the memes on Twitter. Vince Gilligan made Breaking Bad in 2010. And here's a fun story. Or no, it's 2010. Oh, it's 2008. Here's a fun story people might not have known when he made this story. He was like, what if a high school teacher decided he wanted to make drugs to fund his treatment? Okay, that's my idea. And then he went and pitched a show and made it. Later on, someone asked him, so did you realize at the time you made Breaking Bad that there was a show called Weeds about a suburban mom who was making weed as a way to support her family? He said, I know that now. I didn't know that at the time. And if I had known Weeds existed, I wouldn't have made Breaking Bad.
Wow.
Here's the thing. They're such different shows, and he admitted if he'd heard of Weeds, he wouldn't have bothered to pitch it. Even though they're completely different, because the basic idea he had was man makes drugs. And now it's one of the most award-winning shows of all time, and it's spawned a huge franchise, and people adore it. And literally, he would have just stopped had he heard that something kind of vaguely similar conceptually existed. So yeah, if you think it's somewhat similar to someone, that's fine. Just don't plagiarize. You'll know when you're plagiarizing when you're looking at the thing and trying to copy down what they did. But if you find that like some of the themes you're hitting kind of reflect themes you've read, that's okay. Just like tell them through your character's eyes, and it'll be unique. As Hoku says, let go of that constant fear.
Yeah.
And if you find that you're starting to turn into another story, well then think of sit down and go, okay, what's the thing I haven't thought of before? What's a random thing? Okay, I'll think, what does this mean? Like, you can find ways to change your story and also if you really need to, but more likely than not, you're overthinking it.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll also mention, here's a question to kind of answer. What, I think people often are like, okay, I can draw, or I know someone who can draw. I might be able to find the time. This is cool. I have a big idea, but like, how do I know that what I'm doing is people will find it interesting? What genres do people like? What's good to do, right? I mean, the obvious answer is if you do a romance, there's probably an audience for it, which is cool. There's a great audience for romance, which is awesome. I wish that Webtoons had existed when I was in like high school and I could have written something. But like, there is an audience for literally every type of story out there that has some form of a story to it. You're not limited in genre. Yes, the industry is into superhero films right now. That's cool, but maybe you don't want to do superhero films. Maybe you want to do something weird and quirky and unusual and daring. And you know what? There isn't an executive for webcomics. There's no one saying you can't. Even on Webtoon, there's no like. Obviously, to become a Webtoon original is very specific. But like, 90% of people, 99% on Webtoon aren't like going in like having the arbiters telling them this is what you're allowed to do. Oh, people aren't interested in a mystery story about a goldfish trying to solve who killed the fish in his tank. Like, whatever. Like, there's no guard telling you can't. And if you find it interesting, there's bound to be other people who will too.
I decided when I was making Tamberlane that my audience was myself. I was going to draw the story that I wanted when I was a kid, that I would have just died for, that had all my favorite influences, all the things I loved growing up, just smush everything in there that I could, because if I'm not having fun making it, what's even the fucking point? Like,
don't make what you're making because someone else might find it fun. Do it because you're finding it fun. Because I'm sorry, everyone's unique, but you're not unique enough that that 0 out of 7 billion people think your idea is cool. That'd be an accomplishment to write a story that every person in the universe all collectively hated. Like,
that would be impressive.
There are people out there that'd be impressive. Like, if we say it's hard for everyone to like something, it's also hard for no one to like something. There will be people who like your story. And when I mentioned this today in a different stream, but I wrote RuneScape fan fiction when I was in 7th grade, and I wrote like 4 updates, and it was just like this little it was like a very simple story idea. I only got like a few pages in, and I developed like this really dedicated little tiny fan base. And then I quit doing it because at the time I was going into high school, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna be too busy now. But like, there were people who were interested in my story, and I was a kid who had, just like I'd never written a script that I wrote Mothorial, I'd never written a prose story when I wrote that. And there's people out there who are going to be interested. It might not be millions of people, but it doesn't need to be. And I know people are talking about, at Barnes & Noble right now, like, people are publishing their books and they're not getting put on the shelf because Barnes & Noble's like, there's only so much space. That is not true on the internet. There is not only so much space to put out something. There's a lot of space. There's a lot of space available. There's a lot of shelves available. Which I think leads to the question that's really important for us to answer, which is where do I host it? Because people will say, obviously Webtoon, but we want to talk about like why that isn't necessarily always the best option, but why there is another option available. And I think Caytlin, I guess I'll talk about the weakness that Webtoon does have, and you can talk about the solution that we have an option for.
Yeah, sure.
Webtoon's cool. It's great. But Webtoon originals underpay people. There's people posting about how they get paid $25 to ink an entire page, which is ridiculous. There's pressure to release every single day or by like every other day, which is burnout inducing. You have to draw the comic vertically. which is cool if you're really only doing panel to panel, but if you're doing more than that, it can mean your art gets kind of cut off in weird ways.
I will
Maybe
say
you want
that
to.
Canvas does not require vertical. Webtoons Originals does, but people do complain if you post non-vertical comics on Webtoons. But you know
The
what? Screw them.
community expects it, yes. Um,
I do it anyway.
so what is the method that you and your husband created? Because I think that's a really good example of like some we could, we don't want to just say like vague platitudes. We actually, Caitlin has worked on Tamberlane for years in other comics and has experience and knows what sucks and what works and what's needed. And her husband created a really cool free thing that
Yeah.
helps with that. I use it on my comics, so I thought I'd give you a chance to talk about that.
Yeah, Tapas all the way also is very good, as Terrablinks points out. I don't have a lot of experience with Tapas personally, but I have seen it in the game for a while. But anyway, when so I used to be on WordPress with the Comic Press plugin, and then later the Webcomics plugin, which are fine. They were basically industry standard for over a decade. Um, but the problem is WordPress is designed for everybody to be able to use it for everything. And it's as a result, you're basically cobbling together a bunch of plugins, especially if you're not particularly web experienced, right? With code on the back end. Um, and it gets really slow and really bogged down, and nothing is really doing exactly what you want it to do, and so on. So eventually I went to my husband, who at this point is now basically a full stack developer, and I was like, man, I want something else. I hate this. And so for a while now, he has been putting together this thing called Comic Git, GIT, which is a basically a service that runs on GitHub that takes files on your computer and folders on your computer, builds a webcomic framework around them, and then hosts them for free on GitHub pages, or just outputs the HTML files so that you can put it on another host if that's what you want. And the best thing about this is that it outputs a static page, which means that it doesn't have a lot of computation done on the client side. It's all just an HTML page, so it loads super duper fast. And I'll basically, anytime I update my site, I just go into a folder on my computer. I write the post in like a notepad, just plain text, and drag
Just
the
drag you
folder
into
in.
the folder and
Yeah,
press upload, and it's done. It just does it for you. It's very cool.
yeah, it's really good. It's comicgit.com if you want to check it out. He
Yeah,
has tried.
TamberlaneComic.com and MothorialComic.com both use Comic Git. So if you go to like Tamberlane and you see the layout, obviously you can customize how you want it to look all you want,
Yeah,
but like the foundations of the site are just Comic Git, which is just uploading to a. It's you can
yeah,
theoretically just download it, put your comics into the pages, press upload, and you're done within like less than an hour if you really wanted
yeah.
to. It's very cool.
GitHub is a pain in the ass if something goes wrong, so that is one warning I will give you. But my husband has tried really, really hard to make it so that it's as beginner code allergic friendly as possible. For changing the stuff, like the way it looks, you can just he's set aside essentially as dummy a like CSS file as possible where everything is meticulously labeled, so you can just like put in a color and put in a file name and be like, done, I have a banner, the colors are different, the end, never need to touch it again, that kind of thing. Anyway, so that's something we put together. If that's something that you are interested in, that's cool. It's free. uh we haven't quite finished putting together the like, whoa, look at us, we're Comic Git website yet, but you can still
Getting there,
see it.
yeah.
It's getting there. You can still see, everything we've got. It's available. He has a Discord server where he provides tech help for people who need it. It is as deeply customizable as you want it to be. I got my hands deep into the guts and fixed it all up. But so that is one option. WordPress is another option. Um, there's a
I'm really, really bad at programming. I wish I was better. I used to be kind of okay in high school and college, but it's been like 10 years since I've done it. And I was able to build a pretty good website. And I would get help from people sometimes. I'd be like, hey, I want to do a CSS thing. How do I do this? But like, I never had to really touch like crazy levels of programming. I could just be like, I want to make this blue, which is great. Yeah, it's free. It's 100% free. Go to comickit.com. It'll link it to GitHub. There's a whole tutorial. Part of why ComicGit is part of this presentation, we're not just, throwing it out there as advertising. It's because it's free. It literally is. We understand, right, that there's a few barriers to making a comic.
Yeah.
There's the creative, there's the energy, there's the time, and there's the uploading. These are all part of why comics have gotten more popular, is that Webtoon has made it a lot more accessible.
Yeah.
Our goal isn't to replace Webtoon, right? Because Webtoon is uniquely what it is. This is a way that Ryan and Caytlin have made to help people who want to have a website be able to do that without, because like that's an inaccessibility to a lot of people.
And also, like, you own your own data, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's very cool. So feel free to check that out. And I guess that leads to I would say is the last topic, which so to kind of review what we have so far for those who are joining later or who just kind of want to keep track of stuff. If you are nervous about being creative with if you have an idea, if you have no idea and no art, nothing, well then that's fine. But if you have an idea, even if it's vague, even if you're worried that maybe someone else has done parts of it before, just write whatever you think is cool. Just have fun with it. Don't worry if someone else has done it. It'll become your own thing. If you are an artist who doesn't think you're good enough, just start anyway, because you're always good enough, because whatever you do at the beginning of a webcomic is always going to be the worst the webcomic looks, because that's inevitable. It will get better. And you will learn a crash course, as Caytlin said, in how to be an artist. You will learn trial by fire how to become better as a writer, better as an artist. It will just improve your craft. If you cannot draw or you cannot write, there are people out there who have the opposite problem. Talk to your artist friends. Find out if maybe I just talked to Izzy. I was like, hey, do you want to try something? Again, we started out as a TV pilot, and then we're like, you know what? Why don't we just make it a webcomic? Let's do it ourselves. Let's do it. Let's just make it our own thing. If you can't do one aspect, see if anyone is interested in telling a story who also wants to, but has a similar barrier in the opposite way. They're an artist who doesn't want to write. You're an artist who doesn't want to draw. Find people. You don't have to do this by yourself. Once you've made something and you're trying to get there, don't worry about finding the biggest audience in the world. You're not going to. The chance of any of us becoming multi-million view people is very small, and you don't need to. It's pointless to try. Just make a story for the people who love it, let it grow naturally, and realize that with Patreon, you can get pretty good amounts of money pretty quickly. You can get, like, if 20 people donate $10, you're making $200 a month, and that's money. And as we all know right now, as young people and people all ages, like, man, money is nice to have right now. It's tough. So $200, $300 means a lot. And, like, you will grow. Caytlin now makes, over, like, almost $4,000 and is able to pay pay a team to help, which that was a pipe dream when Caytlin started, I'm sure. I didn't think you thought that was going to happen when you wrote it. You wrote it because it was fun.
Yeah.
And if you want to upload a website, there's Webtoons, there's Tapas, there's many cool websites. If you want to have your own site, there is currently not an easy version of that, but that is what Caytlin and Ryan are starting to create with this ComicGit, which is a pretty simple. I'm not good at code, and I was able to instantly understand it. ComicGit.com is a free thing. You can go there and check it out, and it helps you build your own website. So if you do not want to use Webtoon, if you don't want to use Tapas, if you want to have your own website, or if you want to do both, this is a free version that will let you do that without having to be a coder. So hopefully that is kind of giving you all a sense of like, oh, maybe I can do this. Like, maybe this isn't impossible. Maybe I don't have to be the best at everything to do something amazing. Which I think leads to the final point that I want to ask Caytlin about, especially, is how did you find that audience, and how did Foxglove, like, what was Foxglove as a part of that?
Okay, so, honestly, I found my audience more or less just, like, clawing one person in at a time, just over several years, leaning into not leaning into, roleplay communities I was a part of, doing commissions, pulling in people from, the pony fandom or whatever, but really, it was just being as open and loud as I could, and, like, For a long time, especially when I was starting out, I was really chasing wanting to be a part of some of these more long-running like groups of webcomic friends, like the Iron Spike and Jeff Jacks and everybody like that, who are together as like the 2010s era big webcomic names, right? And I went to a lot of cons and wanted to be like, this is where the cool webcomic people are. I want to be a cool webcomic people. But what I have learned is that when you are starting out with something like this, you find a group of people and make friends with people who are both a little bit above your skill and a little bit below your skill. 5-minute warning. Cool. So 5-minute warning. So I will finish my thought. You make friends with people of your skill who are a little bit above you and a little bit below you, and you form like a group of people who are just really encouraging to each other. You always share each other's stuff. You are cheerleaders for each other. You are always hoping to that like, yeah, it's so cool that you got that cool gig. And over time, you become that new cool group, right? And so I think that community is a vital part of this, and to that effect, like Gunny and Gunny Waffle in the moderator in the comments, and a couple other folks and I sat down and we were like, we want to make a collective of our webcomics, but we want to focus a community not so much on our webcomics, although yes, that is great and that should be a part of it, but also just on fostering this feeling of creation and like encouragement, and like if you need somebody to look over your stuff, or like you just want to share in the burden of creating, that there's a community of people that you can go to. So we made Foxglove Comics, foxglovecomics.com, which is a Discord, and
We just share our comics that we make, and we kind of formed a community, because and here's where I'll just touch on, I think, the final point too, which is, let's be honest, this is CozyCon. A lot of people here are furries and are like interested in furry stuff. Probably want to do a furry comic. There's a built-in community right there. People who probably will be interested. I love finding new furry comics. It's always exciting. Not that you have to do a furry webcomic, but most people probably at least want to have one or two furry characters in their thing. Like, there is always some sub community of something that has some relation to what you're doing. That may be a great place to start. And honestly, you probably have some friends and people out there, even if it's just like the people online in VR chat, or on like Discord, who you can share it with them first and see what they think, and maybe they'll want to work on it, maybe they'll want to read it, maybe they'll want to share with their friends. Like, just the real moral of the story today is just start.
yeah.
That's the message is just start. If you
Just
have
start
a
and
thing,
don't stop.
don't stop. And if you have a thing that you think will prevent you from doing this, there often are solutions, and it's often based more around the idea that no one will think you're good enough than the reality of it, because you are good enough, right? You can tell your story and it'll be great. And if you can't do it alone, there's a lot of people out there, and you can find that. And lastly, I'll just add to the point of, here's the thing. If you are worried that there will come a time where you have to take a small break because you're getting worn out, every webcomic does. Your webcomic will not die if you take a few months off. So just don't think that you're starting something that literally you're not allowed to stop ever for 10 years. That's not true. Like, you can have breaks. So don't be afraid. Just have a good time. And I think that's kind of what we wanted to share today. Like, I love webcomics, and all I want is to read more of them. I really want to see more and see this community grow and see this passion grow. So thank you all so much for joining us, and I really hope to see stories from all of you and hear what you have to say.
Yeah, it was really great to be able to talk with you guys. Make your furry isekai. I want to read it. And enjoy the rest of CozyCon, and check out our comic, TamberlaneComic.com, if you'd like to.
Yes, thank you so much, y'all. Tamberlane.com, Mothorialcomic.com. If you want links to all the different comics we have going, you can go to foxglovecomics.com, which Gunny has just linked. And Here's a fun thing: once you go to Tamberlane.com or any of them, at the bottom there are little banners that lead you to the other comics, so you can see all different stuff that all these artists have got going. And there's a lot of cool sci-fi, fantasy, slice of life stories that we're telling. So check them out.
Hooray!